Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. My guest today on Writers at Work is Christine Murphy, authors of Notes on Surviving the Fire, a novel that's available now. Christine's debut novel, Notes on Surviving the Fire, is well published by Knopf and enjoying enviable reviews. The Los Angeles Times wrote, Murphy has certainly written a furious, fast-paced, emotionally resonant, and memorable novel. And the New Yorker said the narrative is equally layered with a thriller's bone, a satire's glare, and a comeuppance story, anarchic spirit. My review? How dare a first novel be so engaging, challenging, and absorbing? What do we know about Christine Murphy? She has a PhD in religious studies, spent a year as a resident in a Buddhist nunnery, and lived, worked, and traveled in more than 100 countries. That's not much to go on, and I'm quite eager to learn more about her and how Notes on Surviving the Fire came to be. Therefore, Christine Murphy, welcome to Writers at Work.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Christine, in which of those more than 100 countries were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in the U.S., actually, in rural New Hampshire.
Okay. And what was rural New Hampshire like in those days for someone, I'm assuming, liked to read, was interested in education? How
Yeah,
was
it was lovely actually because I grew up in a very small town on a farm, and so I spent a lot of time outdoors by myself. I feel like nowadays I hear about helicopter parents a lot, and I don't have kids, so I don't have a horse in this race, and I think people should parent their children however they think is best. But I will say, as somebody who was not helicopter parented, it allowed me to really spend time with my own creativity and just enjoy playing with my own brain. And I think it absolutely helped towards making me such a creative person, because as a young kid, I just told myself stories to amuse myself.
Were you an avid reader?
Oh, absolutely. I have very clear memories of taking my precious allowance money and going to I think it was the Steeplegate Mall back in the day, or Mall of New Hampshire, every couple of months when we would go. And I realized that the because I read very quickly, so the big thick books were often about the same price as the little skinny books. And what I didn't realize was I was looking at the Penguin Classic. So Anna Karenina would be 800 pages and would cost, $7.99, whereas some new bestseller would be 300 pages and would cost the same $7.99. So I, through dint of sheer cheapness, ended up reading a lot of the classics far, far younger than I probably should have been to even understand them. But, dollar per dollar, I got my money's worth.
That's great. And what about the local library?
Oh, yes. So, actually, so I grew up in a town called Hopkinton, and our local library now is a thing of beauty, absolutely gorgeous. But way back in the day, it wasn't. I don't know. My parents didn't go to the library very often with me, and I it was a very kind of it was tough to get around in that town. So I've always been a bit of a book hoarder, to be honest. I do a lot of work in libraries. I hang out in libraries a lot, but I'm kind of a compulsive book buyer, to be honest.
Well, good for you.
I guess I'm supporting the publishing industry all on
That's
my own.
correct. Um, so, what explains your wanderlust?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Jim. I don't have a particular answer because I always love to say, like, I was not raised by diplomats. I feel like people hear my life story and they're like, oh, she's probably got some, uncle who's like the king of somewhere, or a diplomat to somewhere else. And no, my family, actually, my parents had only left the US once for their honeymoon before they came to visit me when I was living internationally. And I just really wanted to do it ever since I was a little kid. And I remember hearing about a thing called a junior year abroad and thinking, oh, that's amazing. And so, I went to this private day school, and we would all kind of sit around, privileged little kids thinking about what college we wanted to go to. And I didn't care about the college. I was like, what country am I going to go to for my junior year abroad? And then I think in eighth grade, I heard about someone who did their entire undergraduate degree abroad. And I was like, oh my God. So it's like 4 years of a junior year abroad. That's so much better. And once I realized that there are ways you can work and study and travel and kind of, just hustle and scrounge around to pay your own way internationally, man, bullets have left guns slower than me leaving the US to explore the world.
And at that point, had you thought about being a writer, or was that too soon? Or
Oh, always. No, I always wanted to be a writer, and specifically a writer of fiction. My dad used to slip me Stephen King novels kind of under the kitchen table, so my mother wouldn't know that that's what I was doing. And I remember very clearly the day, I don't know how old I was, but I was quite young, where I realized that there was an actual human who was creating books, because to me, they were just sort of magical things that existed, just these fantastical parts of my life. And when I realized that was a thing that people did, that there was a human being created a book, it was just love at first concept, I guess you'd call it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I had the same experience when I learned to read at a freakishly early age, and I would read newspapers, and just one day I saw a byline on top of a story, and then I looked at a golden book and I saw an author's name on the front, and it occurred to me that somebody wrote that newspaper story, and that means somebody wrote this book, and that
It's
was a
wild, right? Yeah. When
wonderful
you
moment.
realize, like, I think this is why it's so important to have, either mentors or to have somebody, even if that person, right, is like super famous and lives somewhere else on the planet and doesn't even know that you exist, like have a model, have somebody that you're like, that person grew up in an environment like me and they achieved this thing that I really want to achieve. And just remind yourself that what seems totally impossible is possible. Because I didn't grow up around writers. I didn't even grow up around big readers. My family, they are not big readers. Like I am the black sheep who's just, so for example, now I live on my own and I always wanted to live in a library. That was my fantasy. And my downstairs, my little house is open concept. And it is nothing but books and bookcases on all the walls.
Wow.
Because I always, and every time my parents come over, they're like, when are you gonna decorate? And I'm like, never. This is the decoration. This is it. This is the dream. For me, this is beautiful. I'm very happy.
So you have a PhD in religious studies. What did you perceive parallel careers that you would be in academia and also writing fiction? Did one take precedent over the other? How did you manage that?
I'll tell you exactly how I did it, Jim. It was okay. So I feel like I need to give a caveat here. I do not regret my PhD. I am an intellectually curious person, and religion for me is one of the most fascinating man-made creations on the planet. And it is ultimately the study of narrative, right? World building, how we understand ourselves in the world. So there is a natural alignment with the study of stories and the study of religion. Also, I just didn't think I could ever make a living writing books. I'd never seen anyone do that. It seemed completely out of touch and unrealistic. So instead of aiming for plan A, which was just be a novelist, I figured, well, plan A, I don't have a chance in hell. So I jumped straight to plan B, which was find some job that I don't hate that will allow me to write. And I figured, okay, I'll be a professor. I'll get some nice, pleasant little gig, and have my summers to write. And I like teaching. I like young people. I like intellectually curious places. Like, let's go for it. And that was a hilariously misguided goal, because honestly, you have a better chance of making a living as a novelist than you do as a tenure track humanities professor. Like that was profoundly misguided on my part. So my PhD was born from a misguided but ultimately very practical sort of goal that just fell flat on its face. And so now it has turned into this interesting thing that I did for a decade of my life, and I learned a lot about, and still very little practical outcome from it.
So when you were teaching, were you writing a novel, or I mean, how were you building towards a career as a novelist?
So I had between my master's and my PhD, I took a year. I had some savings from having taught in Japan for a few years, and I spent a year in a Buddhist nunnery in the Himalayas, working on a novel. And I was editing that and polishing that. I hired a few freelance editors during the first year or two of my PhD and worked to get representation to find an agent. And none of that came through. And I thought, okay, well, I'll work on the next one. But what I had not counted on was a really unfortunate experience of terrible violence in the first year of my PhD, which kind of threw me off track. And then, the heartbreak of really pursuing your dreams with everything you've got and falling flat on your face, which was how I interpreted the inability to land an agent or a book deal with the first novel that I completed. By that, I mean, I didn't just write the book and get to the end. I had already done that with a previous book, but that I had done multiple revisions. I was in a writing group. I had hired freelance editors to work with me, like really trying to get this book as putting everything I had into it. And, when you do that with a deeply cherished goal and it does not work out, it's devastating. So then I kind of shifted and licked my wounds and just worked on finishing the dissertation. I was in Mongolia for 2 years for field work. And then when I finished the PhD a few years later, that's when I said, all right, come on, Murphy, like pull it together. Like you got this PhD, you're a Buddhologist. There are like 12 of you on the planet. Um, you can't do anything with it. So now you have to get a job. Well, basically go back to what the original plan was, right? Find a way to pay for your life. And, do you want to pursue writing again? Like you did it, it didn't work out. There's no guarantee it will ever work out. Are you going to like be heartbroken again if the next book doesn't work out and just like cry like a weenie, or are you going to like pull it together and give it a go? So I decided to pull it together and give it another go.
Yeah. How do you assess that period of heartbreak now? Do you find it that in fact it was valuable and necessary?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I think disappointment is part of the human experience, and learning to work with it, pass through it, accept it is a necessary life skill, probably one of the most transferable skills, if you want to use that term, that a person can develop. So I think it is valuable. Learning how to pick yourself back up and try again is the best sort of muscle that I would tell, frankly, anyone pursuing any goal to develop. And I think it's one of those things where we think we have that muscle, like I was raised on a farm. I'm pretty tough. Like it takes a lot to knock me off my stride. But when you're really knocked off your stride, it is kind of like you don't really know that you're capable of picking yourself up until you prove to yourself that you are. So, of course, I say that now, all confident, and let's see the next time I get knocked on my ass how good I am at picking myself up again.
Well, I do think you have to go through that experience to realize that persistence is a primary trait in successful novelists.
I agree, 100%. I think endurance and grit, persistence, resilience, like whatever word you want to pick, that is the way to get any success, to be honest.
Yeah, this is not a career for the weak.
No, it's really not. And it's not a career for people who expect or have relied on luck. So, for example, I have a friend who, she's lovely, but she's had a pretty smooth ride. She did her undergrad straight to master's, straight to PhD, was funded the entire time, got a tenure track position in a part of the world that she loves, married a wonderful man. He works in tech. He bought her this multi-million-dollar house when the market was low. It's now worth like 3 or 4 million. Like she's got a couple of books out. Like things are great, and she decided she wanted to write a novel. And
Of
she,
course.
of course. And it hasn't worked out for her,
Oh,
written one. And, she couldn't get an agent and she reached out and was like, why not? And I was like, because it's really hard. And I think this may be And I don't know, right? Like behind closed doors, who knows what's going on? But like from an outsider's perspective, she hasn't been knocked on her ass by disappointment yet. So she hasn't yet built that muscle of um resiliency. It's kind of like when I hear somebody under the age of 30 giving investment advice, and I'm like, sweetheart, you joined the stock market that on the longest bull run since the 2008 recession. You've never looked at your 401k and seen it cut in half. So you probably think you're some kind of whiz kid, but that's because the entire S&P 500 has done nothing but go up for the last like 15 years. Like
Right.
let's survive a recession and let's see how you handle your panic and then I'll listen to your financial advice.
So when you got to that next stage where you're going to write another novel, um, did you look at what you had written and um, see the what was good and what wasn't in it? Could you determine what was valuable and you could pull forward?
That's another great question because I get asked a lot about the previous novel that was, quite polished but didn't get picked up. I was not very interested in continuing to work on that. I reread it. I really enjoyed it. I think it works as it is, but I also think it speaks to maybe a different time perspective. It wouldn't align with own voices, that movement in publishing, because one of the characters is a white woman, the other is a Japanese woman. I am myself very white. And I think it was wonderfully successful in what it taught me. Whether it would succeed as a, conventionally understood, marketable mainstream novel, probably not. And honestly, I'm happy with it the way it is, and I'm happy with the role it played in my life, everything it taught me. So I was really excited to. I'd had two ideas for stories bubbling in my head for the past 5 or 6 years, and one of them had a lot to do, was situated in higher education. It dealt with sexual violence and forest fires, all the things I was surviving when I was in higher education, and I knew that story had a limited shelf life in my mind because I wanted to move away from that time period. So I thought, okay, if you could write this one and then be done with it, and whether it sells or not, who cares? Like you'll just get it out of your system. Or you could work on, and then I had another idea, which in my mind felt much more, marketable, much more mainstream and more approachable. And I decided to do what became Notes on Surviving the Fire, mostly because I wanted to see if I could write it. And I wanted to put everything I had around those themes and ideas into one place, into a book, and see if I could make something wonderful out of it and then give it away into the world and let it no longer be mine, but let it be for anyone else who's interested in it.
Yeah. The reason I ask first novelists about the novels that they put in the drawer is because you can see the seeds of the effort in the first published novel.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. To my mind, there's such discipline in how you tell the story of Notes on Surviving the Fire. As I was reading it, I kept seeing moments where you could have gone really wrong. And I knew you hadn't because of Knopf's reputation and the reception the book has received. But I mean, what did you think you were writing? A thriller, an expose, a satire? It's all those things. But
It's a great question. I don't know. And actually, when I queried it, one of my biggest challenges was, God, what do I call this thing? Because you have to specify, I've written this, not, it's a blank, give the genre designation and then the word count and whatever. So I was referring to it as a literary mystery, a literary thriller, or a literary suspense novel, depending on the agents I queried what they had specified they were interested in.
right.
Um,
Okay.
and I know people say this, but honestly, Jim, I did not think the book would sell. I didn't think I'd get an agent with it. When I queried agents, I was like, why not? Give it a go. This is such a weird book. No one's going to pick it up, and it sold very quickly. I mean, my agent picked me up very, very quickly, and it sold very quickly. And no one is more surprised by any of that than me.
Publishers Digest published your query letter to your agent.
Yeah.
and it's a model of efficient pitching, I have to say. And let me just read the opening sentences, and just there's a different title, so don't people may be confused. But my novel Carpet Bomb, 100,000 words, is a literary mystery set in dark academia. It questions rape revenge narratives with the tone of Bunny and the grief of my dark Vanessa. So that is Mona Awaz, Bunny, and Kate Elizabeth Russell's My Dark Vanessa. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I love this. I love this opening to your query letter because I love it when emerging authors set such high bars for themselves. You know, because
I mean, what the hell, right? Like,
that's right.
they
But I
kind
mean,
of,
there is risk there. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, the agent could say you're kidding, but more to it, it's important to display that you're confident in the work, right?
I agree with that. I think the comparative titles are really tricky because you can overshoot very easily. I mean, I have been told, and I would extend this advice to others, never pick a massive bestseller. And when I picked My Dark Vanessa, that was a gamble. That was a huge hit, and it is a challenging book. And then I love Mona's voice, and I really enjoyed Bunny, and I thought it got some of the tone and the stylistic choices. But I'll tell you, those were the comps that were used when we went on submission, and those were the comps that Knopf used when sort of pitching it to reviewers. And every step of the process, I had conversations with people, and we all struggled for comps with this book because it doesn't really fit in any one category. I had people reach out to me and say they love it because of what it says about higher education. That for them is what the heart of the book is about. I have
Really?
people who love it who tell me they love how it mocks Southern California or sort of the New England rural hunting life. Others talk about they've never read a book before that accurately conveys the experience of being a rape survivor. One person, I got this lovely random email from someone who was like, I've never seen anyone reference JSTOR and Die Hard in the same book. And I thought that was a great choice. And I was like, oh, thank you. What a very specific observation.
So now you have your agent, and so let's skip ahead, and now you have Knopf, and you've got this book that is neither fish nor fowl. Um, so what were the discussions like? I mean, how much rewriting did you have to do? What did it have to bend towards a certain readership, or what was that like?
So I had several interviews with agents, and I also had several interviews with editors when we went on submission. UPS is here, so my dog might start barking. I apologize.
Oh, it's okay.
And what was very interesting with Knopf is I pronounce it Knopf, but maybe I'm saying it wrong.
Oh, could be enough.
I should probably know how to pronounce my publisher's name. Whatever. So I had two editors on the call, and they were both lovely. And they asked me a lot of questions about my working style and what my goals for the book were. And so they were playing their cards quite close to their chest, and in terms of what revisions they foresaw. And I actually really appreciated that because I never in a million years thought I would be chosen for Knopf. I'm not much of a fan person. I don't lose it over celebrities or things like that. But I lost my friggin' mind when I heard I had a call with Knopf. I'm such a label whore when it comes to them, and I was trying really hard to play it cool on the call, and it was just a joke. But I was very transparent, and I said, look, I'm a deeply practical person, and I don't want the ending to change. I can't give away too much, but there are certain things that happen and certain things that don't happen that I said we can't adjust that. And I said I don't want the voice to change. Sarah's voice is very, very funny, and it's angry, and it's obscene and crass in many ways. And I think one of the disservices that stories about sexual violence in particular do is they just give the impression that a person, a survivor, is either somehow destroyed by it or their personality completely changes. And that, if for anyone who's experienced great hardship or trauma or grief, you are changed, but you are not made into a different human being. And so, talking with them about that, there most of my edits with Knopf turned the book, it was about pacing is what I would say. So there were no big plot changes, there was no tonal change. I do have a tendency to repeat myself when I write. I have a tendency to sort of find a lovely analogy and just like beat it to death, and it loses all its power. And of course, self-editing is something we all aim to be great at, and we just are. This is why you have professional editors who come in,
Right.
because I thought I had weeded out all of my repetition and all of my meandering, and I had not, in fact. So I think it was, working with them, it was about tightening up and trimming the fat.
Yeah, I had an agent say to me once, "Why do you say everything three times?"
I have heard that exact same comment. Right there with you, Jim.
Right. So, this is always an odd question for an author, but you and your protagonist, Sarah, share several bio traits.
Mm.
Are we wrong to look for you in her?
That's, again, it's a wonderful question, and I think this is something that as creators we ourselves can't really answer. In some ways Sarah is very similar to me. In some ways Sarah is frankly who I wish I was. Um I think Sarah's tougher than me. I think she's sassier than me. She says what I usually think but would never say. But in other ways, like, I don't think Sarah and I would maybe get along, quite frankly.
Ah,
I'm much more reserved. I don't know, I'm very sort of warm, fuzzy kind of person. But we do birth our creative children, and there are parallels and overlaps that, interestingly, some people who know me very well have pointed out. And sometimes I balk at that. I would never. No, of course not. That characteristic has nothing to do with me. But it is interesting when someone who has known you for decades points out something about yourself that you don't think is true, but you can't quite write them off because they've
no.
known you for a really long time. So I think Sarah has more and less of me in her, perhaps, than I'm currently aware of.
Yeah. I do think one of the benefits of being a novelist who's writing or attempting to write the book only you can write is that you learn things about yourself.
Yes.
And you can have those epiphanous moments where you could say, yeah, that is important to me. I didn't realize that was important to me.
Yeah,
Or,
absolutely.
yeah. Uh, so I mean, one thing I noticed right away from the book is how quickly you established the character of Sarah. You tell us she's a New Englander in Southern California, signs of wealth all around, but she's not remotely well off. She's a Buddhist in a place that seems absent many other Buddhists. So she's the other, isn't she? And being the other gives her a unique means of interpretation.
Yes. Yes. And actually, I don't know if I would describe her as a Buddhist. She's a scholar of Buddhism. But I don't think we get a clear breakdown of her own sort of world beliefs. One of the things as I was following Sarah along on her adventures was I was very curious to observe her interpretation of events and how they fit within her own kind of world building, because that was an area where she and I really separated. We had different sort of perspectives on how the world works from a meta view.
Yeah, I must say that I don't know very much about Buddhism, and I don't know very many Buddhists, but I need to do some investigation because Sarah has really shook my view of what I thought I knew.
Yeah, well, my dissertation was actually called "The Whitest, the Richest, the Buddhist: How the 1% Appropriated the Tradition of Renunciation," because I was fascinated at how Westerners interpret Buddhism and how profoundly divergent it is from the textual and the lived tradition, which I knew quite well, having lived and worked in Buddhist communities for so many years. And part of that, I didn't want that to be Sarah's research focus, but I wanted to play with that. And frankly, it's impossible to be in Southern California around really privileged communities and have Buddhism not come up. Like rich white people love Buddhism. And if I may be so bold as someone with a PhD in this subject, they do not understand it.
Right, right,
Which is
right.
kind of a bitchy thing to say, but I stand by it.
No, yeah, I can understand that too. One thing I like about Sarah and her suspicions and her cynicism, as you as the author have told us or shown us that they are well earned.
Yeah.
The University of California, Santa Teresa, it really just felt like a campus in hell to me.
I would agree with that. And actually, thank you for saying that, Jim, because I thought one of the things I expected from reviewers would be I thought I would get criticized for going a little over the top with sort of the hellish allegory, and not a single person commented on it. You are actually the first person to say that. So thank you very much, because there's a part of me that every time I read a review, I'm like, hello, fire and brimstone. She's surrounded by jerks. Like she's suffering physical violence and oppression at every turn. That's my definition of hell. And nobody else picked up on that. Possibly because, it's just the lived experience of so many people. So it doesn't really feel otherworldly. But yeah, I think one of the challenges when you're writing about heavy subject matter is how to do it in a way that doesn't wear on the reader. In much the same way that when you have a very voicey character, a comedy that is just like nonstop slapstick humor becomes less funny if you don't give the audience time to take a breath. If you don't
Right.
modulate the tone, the intensity. So both with Sarah's voice, her anger, I didn't want her to be less angry, but I didn't want it to be off-putting. And I don't mean that in the sense of like women have to be likable. I just mean there's something very human about getting numb to extreme responses. And if somebody's just like shouting all the time, you kind of just write them off as, that person who shouts all the time.
No.
So I brought her humor up to balance the voice. And then with the subject matter, that is why it was so important to me that she have loving, close, supportive relationships with Nathan, with the memories of her father, to balance the challenges of both her professional and personal life in the current moment in time.
Yeah, getting back to the point about reviewers, I must say that reviewing books is not a great job. I mean, I did it for a while, and I hated it. I much preferred being a music critic. But your book disturbed me on an emotional level, and if I had to churn out 5 book reviews that month or that week, I could not have committed myself to the book in the way I did, knowing that we would be speaking. And I think that this book requires surrender to the intense emotion of it. Yeah, I saw the humor in it right away. I recognized immediately the tropes of the thriller, but Sarah was speaking to me directly so often that it did have a profound effect. And if I was writing a 500-word column about it, I could have never gotten into that space.
Oh, thank you. That's so
But
lovely to hear, Jim.
yeah, that was a speech. Sorry about that.
No, I love it. I think reviews remind me a bit of translation in that you just have to make so many sacrifices to get the job done. It strikes me as a very challenging role. So I have sympathy for reviewers. I would agree with what you've said. What I'm noticing with feedback on the book is opinions are mixed, I'll say, right? Like, so a few people have said, oh, I wanted a thriller and it was too slow. Like this, this was lethargic. This was not fast enough. And then the very next comment will be, that's what's crazy. A wild horse of a plot. Things were happening left, right, and center. And it's always so funny when you get completely contradictory feedback, because I don't know if that says anything about the book so much as it says about, the expectations that readers had going going into the book. And I think when you write something, when you make art that doesn't fit in a tidy place, right? Like that isn't very genre specific or doesn't have a particular pre-created position for it, you're always going to have that because people don't necessarily know what to do with it. And so they don't know which expectations to bring to it.
Right.
Margaret Atwood has that wonderful quote. Oh, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, where basically she says, you know, commercially appealing art is society's dream for itself. Literary or more critical art is society being willing to look at itself,
Hmm.
or something along those lines. And I
Yeah.
think that, you know, as a reader, I read very, very widely, but I do prefer to be left with something when I finish a book. I invest a lot of time. A movie is what, 90 minutes, 2 hours, like fine,
Right. Right.
be left with it. A book, I invest time in a book. And I can't read with any distractions. I can't have music on or anything. It's very solemn experience for me. And so I really want to have things to mull over in a book. I want to be swept away and caught up and completely engaged, but I like a gray area. I enjoy moral ambiguity. I think that's a much more realistic portrayal of the human experience. But that type of writing, I don't know if I'd say it has a smaller appeal per se, but frankly, I think it's a harder thing to sell because you can't compare it to any one thing. I'm just as it was tough to query and go on submission with the book because we did not have a one-to-one correlation, you know?
Right.
Drag queens in space. If you love that, you'll love this book, right? A meets
Right. Right.
B. I think that's where, as this book finds readers, hopefully they will talk about it and connect with it and share it. Because it is hard to pitch. And I also think there are some subject matters like sexual violence that a lot of people don't want to engage with. And honestly, I'm usually one of them. Rape is portrayed so kind of ridiculously or shallowly or just God, I call it rape wallpaper. Like the Game of Thrones TV show was guilty of this. It was just like somebody would be getting raped in literally every episode, and it wasn't like The Handmaid's Tale where that sexual violence was inundating you in order to prove a point. It was just like decorative in the background. And I didn't find it quote unquote distasteful. I just thought you're picking something that has too much cultural and psychological baggage to just sprinkle in the background that way. You're actually pulling your audience away from what you're trying to do without putting enough weight behind this thing that has its own gravitas. And so I always found that a bit of a disconnect in that particular narrative. And I tried to really, I tried to write the book in a way that felt oppressively, inescapably intimate, because that is a metaphor. I mean, well, not a metaphor. I mean, that is how I would describe sexual violence. Frankly, somebody is forcing themselves on you. And I wanted that experience for the reader when they read the book.
Yeah. Let me tell you about two emotional reactions I had to the scenes in which the students reviewed their experiences in reporting rapes.
Yeah.
One was, if I were a woman, I don't know how I could survive in such a system,
No, yeah.
in which whatever punishment visits the rapist, it doesn't approach what the victim has suffered and will suffer. The other was, how can I protect my granddaughter?
Mm,
That's not breezy reading.
right.
And as you said, uh, that you like, it allowed me to take something away from the book when I finished it. I may have spent more time thinking about the book than I did reading it.
Oh, I love that. Oh,
So,
Jim, that's probably the highest compliment you could
uh,
pay an author. Oh,
I,
Jim, I'm all flushed over here. Thank you. Thank you. What a lovely thing to say.
so tell me, what are you working on now?
Well, so this book was really looking at systems of violence and how the world betrays women. And my next book is looking at systems of violence and how the world betrays men. So it's not set in Sarah's world. There are no overlap with the characters, but I really do see these books as in tandem with each other. I think if you want to look at quote unquote the woman's experience, then you can't do that without also looking at the man's experience. So yeah, that is my next project.
And how far along are you?
I am at the joyous, terrifying stage of just getting words on a page. My agent asked for a draft August 1st, and I, like an idiot, said sure. So I have an internal draft for myself before then, and then hopefully I can turn that pile of gobbledygook into something horrendous. Because I know some people give first drafts to their agents, and oh my goodness, I could never. I respect her too much to ever force her to read my pile of junk that is a first draft.
Wow. My guest on Writers at Work has been Christine Murphy, authors of Notes on Surviving the Fire. Christine, what a delight talking to you. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you, Jim. It was lovely.
Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersaTworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.